Lakota chief was captured and tortured by soldiers. A captive girl freed him and found love. The chain was iron, not the thin kind they use on dogs or prisoners who are already broken, the heavy kind, the kind a blacksmith makes when he knows what he is making and does not flinch from what it will be used for. It went around my left ankle. The other end was bolted to a stake, driven into the floor of a wagon, and the floor was pine boards that had been green once, maybe, color of old blood, dark and swollen from rain. I remember the smell of it, wet pine and something else. Grease from a harness, the faint copper of my own blood from where the leg iron had opened the skin above the ankle bone. I do not tell this story because I want to. I tell it because it is the truest thing I know. And a man my age, I am 61 winters now, though I stopped counting by soldiers' numbers long ago. A man my age knows that the truest things are the ones that cost the most to carry. And this one I have carried a long time. Long enough that I can set it down carefully, the way you set down a rifle you have been holding all night, and not have it go off in someone's face. My name, the name my mother gave me, I will not speak here. The name the soldiers wrote in their ledger was Runs Far. They did not ask for it. One of them saw me run. This was before they caught me, before the leg iron, before all of it. And he wrote it down, and that was that. I have been called worse. I was a war chief of the Oglala, not the principal chief. That was my uncle's brother, a quiet man with a deep voice, who had led councils since before I could remember. I was the one they sent when words had already failed. When the horses needed to go somewhere and come back fast. When a younger man needed to watch something and bring back what he saw. When the thing that needed doing needed a man who could keep his mouth shut and his eyes open at the same time. I was good at that. I was very good at that for a long time. And then one morning in the moon, when the plums are scarlet, which is what you call September, they came out of the blue stem grass in a column of twos, 23 soldiers. And they had their rifles ready, and their faces had the particular kind of emptiness that men get when they have told themselves they are doing something necessary. I was alone. I had ridden out before dawn to check the water in a creek that had been running low, because we needed to know if it would hold through the autumn, or if we needed to move the camp. That is the kind of thing a war chief does that no one ever writes down. You check the water. You count the firewood. You look at the horse's feet. You do all of it, so that when someone needs to make a decision about something important, you can tell them the thing they need to know. I had my rifle. I had my knife. I had a horse that was not as fast as she used to be because she had thrown a shoe 3 days earlier and I had not yet found the right stone to true up her hoof. 23 rifles. I put my hands up. I have never told anyone that before. The soldier in charge of the detail was a lieutenant. I learned his name later. Graf, with 2 Fs. He was proud of that somehow, though I never understood why a man would be proud of 2 letters that made the same sound. But at first, he was just the one who rode forward and told me in bad Lakota, and then worse sign language, that I was being taken in connection with a raid on a settlement near the fork of the Spade River. I had not been at that raid. I did not even know about it until he told me, but that did not matter much, as things turned out. He had a face like a biscuit, soft and pale, and a little puffy, the kind of face that looks at you and does not see you. They took my rifle. They took my knife. They tied my wrists and put me on my horse and led her at the back of the column. We rode for most of that day, north and then east. Into country I knew less well than I liked. When we stopped for the night, they put the leg iron on and staked me to the wagon wheel. And I sat with my back to the iron rim and watched the soldiers eat their supper. And I tried to think about what there was to do. There was not very much. Not that night. I ate what they gave me, which was hardtack and a tin cup of something that was supposed to be coffee and was not quite, and I did not show them anything with my face. The other captive I did not notice until the second day. She was in the wagon. Shh. I could hear her sometimes. The creak of the boards when she shifted her weight. a cough in the early morning. Once the sound of her crying, though she stopped herself quickly, the way a person does when they have decided crying will not help. And they are right about that. I did not think much about her. I was trying to figure out how many of the soldiers could shoot well, whether any of them left knives in their boots, what the terrain ahead looked like, and whether my uncle's brother would know by now what had happened, and whether anyone would come. The answer to that last one I already knew. You do not send warriors riding into a column of soldiers. Not for one man, not even a war chief. I would not have wanted them to. It is not how things should be done, and besides, the army had a way of turning one raid into a reason for 10 more. So, I was on my own. I thought about that the second night, lying on the floor of the wagon. They put me inside it after the first night, still chained. The stake now driven through a gap in the floorboards. And I thought about it with a kind of flat honesty that I had not always been able to manage when I was younger. I was alone. The soldiers were going to take me to the fort. At the fort, they would charge me with the Spade River raid. They would have a proceeding of some kind, not a real one. I knew enough about army proceedings to know that, and the end of the proceeding would be a rope or a cell. Maybe both, one after the other. And there was not a great deal I could do about this while I was chained to a plank. That was when she spoke. She said, "They're going to try to break you before we get to the fort." Her voice was low. She was sitting against the other wall of the wagon, in the dark, 5 feet away. I could see the shape of her but not her face. I said nothing. I was not sure the words had been meant for me, whether she was talking to herself. She said, "Graf does it. I've seen him do it to 2 others. He waits until the 4th night and then he sends 2 men. Not to kill you, just to make sure you're not. He wants you not able to think straight when you walk into that fort. It makes the proceeding cleaner." I asked her how she knew this. She said she'd been in the wagon for 11 days. She'd been at the Spade River settlement, not one of the homesteaders. She was the one who cooked for them. She said, a hired woman, and when the trouble started she'd ended up in the wagon, and now she was going to the fort too, to testify. She didn't say much about what happened at the settlement beyond that, and I didn't ask. The way she said it, clean and short, like she was pressing a hand over something that still hurt, told me there was more than I needed to know. Her name was Addie Crane. I told her my name, not the name in the ledger, my real one. She said it back quietly, the way you repeat a word in a language you're trying to learn, making sure you have it right. She did not apologize for her pronunciation, which was slightly wrong. She just said it the way she was able to say it, and left it at that. For some reason, that small thing sat with me for a while. Most white people either refused to try or made a performance of trying. She just said it. She said, "I think I can get the stake out." I was quiet for a moment, she said. "The floor's rotted near the back corner. I found it 2 nights ago. The wood's soft enough that if I work at it long enough, I've been working at it. Piece of the wagon hardware I pulled loose. But I can't do yours. Mine is the one in the back corner. Yours is in the middle, where the planks are still solid. I can't do yours." I asked her why she was telling me. She didn't answer right away. The wagon hit a rut and we both shifted with the roll of it. Outside horses, the jingle of tack, the murmur of 2 soldiers talking at the front of the column, about something I couldn't hear clearly, she said. "Because when I get out, I'll need somebody who knows this country, and because I have seen what they do to men like you at the fort." My husband was. She stopped, started again. "I know what the proceeding looks like." I thought about that. Former husband then, the way she'd cut herself off. Or dead. Some third thing she was not ready to say. I told her that getting out of the wagon would not be the end of it. The soldiers would track us. We were in open country. She was a white woman, and I was a Lakota man, and any homesteader between here and the territories would take one look at us and go for a gun, she said. I know. She said it the same way she'd said my name, not like she hadn't thought about it. like she had thought about it and had made a decision and was not looking to be argued out of it. I told her about the fourth night. She said she knew. She said she'd heard them talking. I asked her if she had a plan for the fourth night. She said, "I'll have the stakeout by then. We go out the third night." I lay back on the boards and looked up at the dark. A nail head in the plank above me, a thin line of night sky where two boards didn't quite meet. I asked her what she would need. She told me. The third night came cold. They made camp in a hollow between two long swells of grass, which was good for us. The wind off the flat land would cover sounds, and the hollow itself meant the men posted on watch were up on the swells and looking outward, away from the wagon. I had spent the 2 days between watching and thinking, not panicking. Panic is a kind of noise, and noise costs you. I watched the soldiers the way I used to watch country before a raid, learning which ones were careful and which ones were going through the motions. Long the watch rotation was, where the horses were picketed, whether Graff was the kind of man who woke in the night to check his sentries, himself, or whether he trusted the roster and slept. He slept. I also talked to Addie, in the dark, at night, in low voices. This was the part that surprised me. Not the talking. I can be patient with words when I need to be. What surprised me was that it was easy. She asked questions that were not stupid. Not the questions white people usually asked me. Not about warfare or ceremony or how we cured meat. But questions like, what is the name of that star formation and why is it called that? And what does it feel like to run a horse at full speed in the dark when you cannot see the ground? Questions that were about something I had actually known and lived, rather than about the idea of me that they had already decided on. I answered them. I told her about the stars. I told her about running a horse in the dark. I told her that the horse knows the ground better than you do, and you have to trust that fully, without reservation, which is harder than it sounds. Because every instinct you have is screaming at you to pull back on the reins, and the whole point is to not listen to that instinct, to go forward anyway, to trust the horse. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she said, "I'm gonna trust you the same way." I didn't say anything, she said. "Whatever we do out there, however you say we go, I'm gonna trust that." I said, "The horse sometimes goes down," she said. I know. The third night, Graff's fire was on the far side of camp. 2 sentries on the swells, pacing north to south, south to north. The rotation was 40 minutes, based on what I'd timed over the 2 prior nights. The horse picket was to the east, downwind. She got the stakeout just after midnight. I heard it, a soft tearing sound, wet wood giving way, and then a low exhale that was not quite a word. Then quiet, then her moving across the floor, slow stop-saw, moving again. She had the piece of wagon hardware in her hand. A bolt, thick and iron, about the length of my palm. She crawled to where my stake was, and she worked on it with that bolt, for what felt like a long time, and was probably 20 minutes. Hands were shaking. Not from fear, or not only from fear, but from the effort, the cold. She'd been working on her own stake for 2 days, and her hands were worn down. The stake didn't move. She stopped. I could hear her breathing. I told her to give me the bolt. She put it in my hand. I felt the shape of it, found the angle I wanted. The plank I was staked through was solid, the way she'd said, but the board next to it was less so. I could feel the difference when I tapped. The stake was through solid wood. The board next to it was not. Which meant if I could crack the board, if I could get the split to travel from the bad board into the good one, I told her to put her hands over her ears. She did. I put the edge of the bolt against the cracked seam in the adjacent board, and I hit it with the heel of my palm as hard as I could, without making a sound, and then again, and then a third time. The third time something gave. Not loudly. A crack about as loud as a green stick in a fire. The seam traveled. I worked the stake back and forth. It came up. She let out a breath, pulled the chain through the loop, and got my feet under me, and felt the blood come back into my ankle in a wave of pins and fire. I had about 3 feet of chain, which dragged, which was a problem. I wrapped the last 2 feet around my forearm to keep it from clanking. She looked at me in the dark. I could see her face now, my eyes having been adjusted for a long time. She was younger than I had estimated from her voice. Late 20s, maybe. Dark hair, loose. A bruise along her jaw from the early days of the captivity, yellowing now. She watching me the way I had told her. The way you watch a horse running in the dark. All in. I pointed to the back panel of the wagon. She nodded. The latch was on the outside. That was the whole problem, and we both knew it. 3 of the boards on the lower section of the back panel were the same rotted pine as the floor near her corner. She had noticed this too, before I did. She pointed to them. I put my fingers on the boards and felt the give. I worked the lowest one, rocking it, slow, no sudden force, and I could get my fingers behind it and pull it off without a crack. Just a long, slow peel, like bark from a tree. I got 3 boards off. The gap was enough. Barely. I went first because I had to see the sentries before she came out. I went through on my back, chain arm first, and for a second I was wedged at the shoulders, and everything in me went cold. This is how it ends. Wedged in a gap in the back of a wagon while the sentries turn. And then, I exhaled and went flat, and I was through. Lying face up on the ground under the wagon, with the cold grass against my neck, and the stars above me, and the sentries on the swell, and no alarm. I reached back up through the gap. She took my hand and I steadied her as she came through. We were out. Took us 6 days to get to the territories. I am going to tell you about that honestly, without making it neater than it was. It was hard. It was cold at night and exposed in the day, and we were on foot because I had decided not to try for the horse picket. Too much risk of noise, and a man on horseback can be seen on the plains from a mile away in daylight. On foot, in the grass, you can disappear. You move differently. You move the way the grass moves. She learned fast. That was the thing about Addie. I had expected. I do not know exactly what I had expected. Someone I would have to coax and wait for. Someone I would have to decide things for, in a way that was more like managing than partnering. She was not like that. She was tired. She was hungry. Her feet were wrong for the distance. She had been in the wagon for 11 days, and the boots she had were not made for walking through broken country. And she did not once ask me to slow down or tell me it was too much. She asked me once, on the second day, if I could wrap her left foot differently. I looked at it. The heel was raw. I showed her how I would do it with the strip of cloth we'd taken from the wagon lining. She did it herself while I watched, getting it right on the first try, and then she stood up and we went on. She did not ask me much in those 6 days. She watched, the way a person watches when they are trying to learn something, and they know the learning is more important than the questions. At night, when we could not move, she slept close for warmth, which is just sense, and she did not make anything of it except sense. In the morning, she was up before I was twice. The second time, she'd found a low place in the rock where rainwater had collected, clean enough to drink, and she was waiting when I woke. I thought about that more than I should have. Or maybe exactly as much as I should have. The soldiers searched for 2 days, and then they were gone. I know because I went back and watched the last camp from a distance to be sure. When the column was a thin line on the northern horizon and then nothing, I went back to where she was waiting in the draw by a dry creek, and I told her. She said, "So we're clear?" I said we were clear enough, she said. And she sat down on the bank of the dry creek and took her boots off and looked at her feet and said something short and quiet that was either a prayer or a piece of profanity. I sat down next to her. She had not cried once in 6 days. She did not cry now. She put her feet in the sand of the dry creek bed and let the air at them. I asked her what she was going to do. She thought about it for a while, looking at her feet. She said, "I had a sister in Laramie. I haven't spoken to her in 4 years because of, it doesn't matter. I thought about writing to her from the fort. I'm going to find her instead." I said Laramie was 200 miles west and she had no horse and no money. She said she knew. I told her I knew people. A family near the Platte who ran horses. Who would help? I could get her to them, and from them she could get to Laramie with a horse and a little food. She looked at me. I said, "It is 4 days from here," she said. "Will you stay after you take me to them?" I told her I did not know. That my people were north and east. That I would need to find my way back to them and find out what had happened while I was gone. That I did not know what I was walking back into. She said, "I know." She said it the way she said everything, not arguing with it, just taking it in. But there was something else in her face that I had not seen before. Not sadness quite. Something more considered than sadness. Like a person who has done the arithmetic and does not like the answer, but has done it honestly. We went to the horse people on the Platte. 4 days, as I'd said. By the third day, she could move through the grass without my telling her anything. By the fourth, she was 3 steps ahead of me, made me smile, and which I did not let her see. The family on the Platte was a man named Hector and his wife, and their 2 adult sons. Hector's wife was Lakota, from a band I knew distantly, a woman with gray in her hair, and a way of looking at you that was not unkind but was absolutely clear. She looked at Addie and then at me for a long moment when we walked in, and then she went and put water on to heat, and did not ask questions. They took us in for 5 days while Addie's feet healed to the point where she cried. Those 5 days are separate from everything else. Hector gave me a rifle and a blanket, and did not ask for anything in return, which meant he was asking for something unspecified at some later time, which I accepted, because that is how such things work, and it is honest. His son showed me the horses, and I spent time with them the way you do when you want to know a horse before you decide if you can trust it, and the horses were good. Addie helped Hector's wife. I watched that happen gradually. The first day she was careful, holding back, asking before she touched anything, uncertain what she was walking into. By the second day, she had found her place in the rhythm of the work. Water, fire, food, the small necessary labors of a household. And by the third, she and Hector's wife were talking in a low, comfortable way while they worked. The kind of talk that is not about anything in particular, but is also somehow about everything. I could not hear most of it. I did not try. I slept better in those 5 days than I had in months. On the fourth evening, Hector and his sons went to bed early, and Hector's wife went too, and it was just me and Addie by the fire, inside the house, which was a low solid building, half timber and half sod, with a fireplace that drew well. The fire was going down. Neither of us put more wood on it, she said. "Will you go north?" I said I probably would, not because I wanted to, because I had been gone a long time, and there were things I owed. She was quiet, I said. "What are you thinking?" she said. "I'm thinking that I'm not afraid." Which is strange, because I should probably be afraid of a lot of things and I'm not. She looked at me then. She had been looking at the fire, and she turned and looked at me directly. She did. Sometimes with a plainness that I had gotten used to, but that still landed on me every time, like a cold hand flat on the chest. She said, "In the wagon, you didn't. You held yourself. Whatever they were doing, you held yourself and you didn't break, and you didn't ask me to feel sorry for you. I want you to know that I saw that. What it was." I said nothing. The fire moved. A log shifted. She said, "My husband, the man I mentioned, I'll tell you about him if you want, someday, or I won't. It's not something I need to tell. He was a man who needed things from me that I couldn't figure out how to give him. I spent 7 years trying to figure it out. I never did, and I am very tired of trying to be something I don't understand and can't make sense of." She stopped. Then she said, "With you I know what I'm looking at. That's the first time I've been able to say that." I said, "You've known me 20 days, she said. "I know." She almost smiled at that. "I've also slept next to you in open country for 6 of them. That's not nothing." I said it was not nothing. She said, "Will you come back? After you find your people and sort out what needs sorting." I told her the truth. I said I did not know what I would find when I went back. That there was the matter of the soldiers and what they would do, and what my people would do in response, and I could not predict how that would settle. I said it might be months. She said, I'll be in Laramie. With my sister if she'll have me. If she won't, I'll find work. I'm not hard to hire when people give me the chance. I believed that, she said. I'm not asking for a promise. I'm just asking you to know that if you come back, I will be there. And that I want you to come back. She said that last part plainly, looking at me, not making it smaller than it was. I want you to come back. The fire went down to coals, red and orange. The room was still warm. Shh. I leaned forward and put another log on, because the night would be cold. And she conceded to sleep well before riding tomorrow. With peace she watched me do it. I did not say anything. I am not a man who makes promises I cannot keep. And I did not know what I was riding back into. But I reached out, in the way of the fire. And I put my hand over hers where it rested on the blanket between us. She turned her hand and she took mine. Grip was like everything else about her. No performance, no hesitation, just the thing itself. We sat like that until the new log caught. I went north in the morning. I want to tell you what I came back to, because it matters her, and because it is the kind of thing that a man has to sit with. My uncle's brother was dead. He had died in the second week after my capture, not from the army, but from a sickness that had been with him a long time, and that the stress of the this summer had shortened. 3 families had moved east toward the agency because the autumn had been hard, and the winter looked worse, and they were making the calculation that I would have argued against, but that I could not honestly say was wrong. The younger men were angry in the particular way young men get when they feel that the world is contracting around them, and there is nothing to grip, and no clean way to push back. I knew that feeling. I had felt it when I was their age, and I did not want it to destroy them the way it destroyed. Some of the men I had ridden with, men who turned that anger inward, or burned it on things that could not be burned. I spent that winter there. I want to be clear about that. A full winter, cold and long, working through what needed working through. Talking to the young men. Not telling them what to do but sitting with them in it, which is harder. Hunting what could be hunted. Keeping the horses. Doing the 10 small things that nobody records, but that hold a people together. When everything else is under pressure, I thought about Addie every day. Not in a way that pulled me from my work. In a way that went alongside it, like a river alongside a road. Sometimes I thought about the fire. Sometimes I thought about the sound of the boards when she got the stake out, that soft tearing, and how for a moment I had not known if she had done it. Sometimes I thought about the way she'd said my name back to me in the dark of the wagon on the second night, getting it as right as she could. I wrote her a letter in the spring. Hector's son took it to Laramie on a trip he was making for supplies. It was not a long letter. I am not a man for long letters. I wrote that I was well, and that I had found my people, and that the winter had been hard, but we had come through it. I wrote that I intended to come south when the trails were clear. I wrote that I remembered what she had said by the fire. The answer came back in 2 weeks with the same sun, and it was 3 pages. I will not tell you what was in it. It was hers to say, and mine to keep. I will say that when I finished reading it, sat alone for a while and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Something that was not happiness, quite. Happiness is too light a word, but closer to the feeling of a door opening onto a room you had forgotten. Was in the house, something that had been waiting and was still there. I came south in May. Laramie in May is the kind of place that looks like it was built in a hurry and never quite finished, which it was, and it hadn't. The main street was mud and board sidewalks, and the smell of horses and coal smoke and the particular flat light of a plains morning that makes everything look both very far away and very clear. I rode in on a good roan horse, one of Hector's, and I found the house her sister had on Fauconas east side of town in 20 minutes, because she had written good directions, and because Laramie is not a large town. The house was wood frame, painted white once and now gray. A kitchen garden on the south side, with some early greens just coming up. She was in the garden. She had a trowel in her hand, and she was kneeling in the dirt in the way of a person who does that kind of work enough that they don't think about the kneeling. She did not hear me ride up because the wind was from the south, and there was a mockingbird in the tree by the corner of the house that was making considerable noise about something. I stopped the horse at the gate. The mockingbird stopped. She looked up. I had thought, on the ride south, about what I would say first. I am not a man who spends much time on that kind of thinking. I tend to say what is in front of me. But this felt like the kind of moment that deserved some preparation. I had not come up with anything that sounded right. She got to her feet. She had dirt on her hands, and one knee of her trousers. She shaded her eyes with the back of her wrist, the trowel still in her hand, and she looked at me with that same directness she'd had in the wagon, and by the fire, and every moment in between. She said, "You look better than the last time I saw you." I said, "You look the same." She smiled, not a small smile, the real kind. She opened the gate. She came to the horse and put her free hand on the horse's neck and looked up at me, and her other hand, the one with the trowel, she let hang at her side. I got down from the horse, and I stood in front of her in the mud and spring grass smell of that yard, and she looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. Then she reached up and put her hand against the side of my face. "Dirt from the garden and all," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I said I would. She said, "You didn't promise." I said, "No, but I came." She kept her hand there. Her eyes were steady. The mockingbird started up again in the tree. Somewhere down the street a wagon went by. I put my hand over hers, the same way I had by the fire in Hector's house. She pressed her palm a little closer against my cheek. She said, quiet, "Thank you for coming back." I said nothing for a moment. There was not much to say, and there did not need to be. I had ridden through a winter and a spring to stand in this yard, and everything that needed to be known about that was in the standing. Then I said, "The roan is a good horse. She needs water and some grain." Addie laughed, just once, short and clean. She dropped her hand and took the roan's bridle. She said, "Come inside. There's coffee." I have been in this town now for going on 12 years. I am a man who was a war chief of the Oglala, and I live in a wood frame house in a town that still smells of coal smoke in the winter, and I tend horses for a living, which is a thing I am suited for and which I do not mind. We have 3 horses of our own, and I work for 2 other families who have more than they can manage themselves. The work is physical, and it is honest, and it does not require me to be anything other than what I am, is a man who knows horses and has patience, and can be trusted to say what a horse needs. Addie's sister moved on after 2 years, a man in Colorado, a good one from what I hear, and we have the house. We have made it what it is. The kitchen garden is twice what it was. The south-facing room I put a window in, the second year, a big one, because she likes the light in the afternoon, and I liked making something for her that she had not asked for. People in this town, some of them, I will not tell you, it is all easy. There are men who will not look at me when they pass on the street, and there are women who make different choices about which side of the street to walk on. I know this, and I do not give it more than it deserves, which is not nothing, but is also not everything. There are also men who have come to me for the horses and stayed to talk, and some of those have become the kind of men you nod to and mean it. Hector's family visits. My people, there are fewer of them now, and where they are is not what I would choose for them, and that is a weight I will carry all my life. Some of the young men I talked through that hard winter are men I still hear from. That matters. What I want to tell you, what I have been working toward in all of this, without quite knowing how to say it, is about a morning 2 winters ago. It was January. Cold the way January is cold on the plains, which is a clean and absolute cold. No argument with it. I had been up before dawn to see to the horses, and I came in, and there was fire in the stove and coffee already, and Addie was at the table with she'd been reading. She looked up when I came in and she did not say anything for a moment, just looked. She said, "You're cold." I said I was. She got up and poured coffee and handed it to me. And then she stood close and she put both hands flat on my chest, one on either side, over my coat. She was looking up at me. Her hands were warm from being inside. I could feel them through the wool, she said. "Sit down." I sat down. She sat across from me and went back to her book, and I drank my coffee. That was it. That was the whole of it. I have led men in raids across 40 miles of open country. I have stood in a column of 23 rifles with my hands in the air and kept my face. Shh. Still, I have spent a winter holding a people together with not much more than presence and patience. I have done things that required everything I had. And I am telling you that that morning, that ordinary cold January morning with the stove going, shh, and the coffee, and her hands on my chest, and her voice saying, "Sit down," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like I was the most natural thing in the world to come home to. That morning is among the most valued things I have lived. Not because it was soft. It was not particularly soft. Addie is not a particularly soft woman, and I am not a soft man. It was because it was real. Because she knew what she had in front of her. All of it. Everything. The chain. The soldiers. The miles. The complications. The weight. And she had put her hands on my chest anyway and said, "Sit down." A man who has been a war chief, who has been chained to a plank in a soldier's wagon, who has lived long enough to know the difference between a thing freely given and a thing taken. That man knows what he is holding when someone gives him that. I held it. I hold it still. The coffee was strong and the stove was going. And outside the plains were white and still, and the cold was the clean kind. No argument with it. She turned a page. I drank my coffee. That is the whole story.